The following video was requested by Master DC King 2009.
Jakob's trial and divorce.
Hello. Welcome to GNN News. This is Ackah and George coming. We interrupt this program with some breaking news. This just in, another arrest has recently been made. Only this time, instead of occurring here at Rapper City, it happened at Beacon City. There, it was revealed that one of the inmates at Rapper City had a twin brother. The crazed catch? It seemed the person who got arrested was a former principal of Beacon City Middle School. Sources identified the suspect as Jakob Jones, Alan Jones' twin brother. According to the police records from the Beacon City Police Department, Jakob Jones has been arrested for child abuse, abuse of power, aggravated assault, breaking and entering, and apparently drug abuse. Commissioner George Rangel has requested Jakob Jones to be transferred here at Rapper City to stand trial for all the crimes he committed at Beacon City. A few hours later, the Beacon City Police Department accepted Commissioner Rangel's request and the inmate will arrive here at Rapper City in a few weeks. Be sure to stay tuned for the live event of the trial. Until then, we now return you to our regularly scheduled program. This is Ackah and George coming in, signing off.
A few weeks later, Jakob Jones has arrived from Beacon City to stand trial for all the crimes he committed that led up to his arrest. Let's see what happens next.
All rise for the Honorable Judge Alfred Smith.
You may all be seated. All right. Court is now in session. Today, we'll be hearing the case of a child abuser who resides from another city, other than Springfield. And as a surprise, the defendant for this trial is Jakob Jones, Alan's twin brother. Prosecutor Henry Maverick, read the charges.
Jakob Jones, according to police records from Beacon City, you've been charged for child abuse, aggravated assault, abuse of power, breaking and entering, and drug abuse.
How do you plead?
Not guilty, Your Honor. My brother Alan's in prison because of the Tripp Gang. He was only trying to teach them a lesson for being racist and homophobic and committing crimes. They even ruined the Sage Crew's lives.
All evidence to the contrary. Your brother plotted a series of mass assaults against most of the Tripp Gang on school grounds back at Springfield, and manipulated the Sage Crew into committing them. And because of him, his old high school got shut down, and his former staff lost their old jobs. Hence, he allowed child abuse at Springfield High School. And according to your criminal record, you committed child abuse even at Beacon City Middle School. So, I call upon the first main victim of the crime, Tripp Wilson.
You know, I'm totally shocked to learn that my former principal has a twin brother, but I also can't believe that twin brother of his is just as mean and abusive as he is. When I first met Principal Jakob, Principal Alan's twin brother, he dodged Keating as he was about to hit him with the club. Then that psycho kicked his teeth in. So I ran up to the corrupt principal and hit him in return. But as Vince Jones and I were about to surround him, Jakob pushed me towards Alexine, knocking us both down. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Tripp. I call upon the next main victim of the crime, Alexine Davis.
I'm as shocked about our former principal's twin brother as my boyfriend Tripp is, and from the first moment I met Principal Jakob, he's been a misogynist towards me like Alan was towards not just me, but Simona, Cherry, Samantha, Lena and Aurora too. Therefore, for throwing Tripp towards me, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Alexine. I call upon the next main victim of the crime, Caden Concord.
It's bad enough I got brutally assaulted by my former principal for assaulting his daughter Serenity the day I got expelled and arrested for it. But to get assaulted by his twin brother at the bloody night space? That's even worse. And because Principal Jakob kicked me upon dodging me when I tried to hit him with a bat for what he did to my cousin Michael, Victor, his sister Allison, their cousin Samantha, and Daniel Parker, I sprained my ankle. And thus, Samantha Webster Pitts had to call an ambulance for me and everyone else who got hurt during the fight against Serenity's uncle. Therefore, I find Serenity's uncle guilty.
Objection, Your Honor. That Brad over there assaulted my niece with a bat and the day he got expelled and arrested. My brother was only trying to teach him a lesson. And so was I. If Keating hadn't done that, Alan and I wouldn't have taught him a lesson for getting my brother arrested.
Overruled? Yes, Keating assaulted your niece, but that does not mean Alan has the right to do that to him in return. And what you did was a repeat of your twin brother's crimes. Anyway, I call upon my first two witnesses, Annex and Nexxar Keating.
You know, Nexxar and I were shocked to learn that our former principal has a twin brother. But that doesn't change how mad we are about what that twin brother of his did to some of our friends in the bloody nights. Therefore, I say he's guilty. Yeah. I agree with Annex. We find Principal Jakob guilty as charged.
Thank you, boys. I call upon my next two witnesses, Lena and Aurora Sullivan.
It's bad enough our former principal assaulted me, my sister Aurora, and our ex-boyfriends the day we got expelled and arrested from Springfield. But now we find out that he has a twin brother who assaulted not just Tripp, Alexine, and Keating, but some of the bloody knights, Keating's cousin, and their friends too. That's even worse. I agree with Lena. So I speak for the both of us when I say we find Serenity's uncle guilty as charged.
Thank you, girls. I call upon my next two witnesses, Luca and Hudson Ardern.
It's one thing for Lena and Aurora to get assaulted by Serenity's dad back at Springfield along with Annex and Nexxar, but for three of their friends to get assaulted by her uncle? That's even worse. I agree with Luca. And we are honestly surprised Serenity's uncle's the twin brother of her dad. But nevertheless, we find him guilty for everything he did at Deacon City.
Thank you, boys. I call upon my next witness, Deacon Buford.
You know, I'm surprised Serenity had an uncle who turned out to be our former principal's twin brother, but I'm also shocked to learn that her uncle's just as abusive as her dad. Especially since Principal Jakob assaulted the same three of my friends who got assaulted by Principal Alan on school grounds back at Springfield. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Deacon. I call upon my next witness, Simona Reaston.
I'd have to agree with Deacon on this one. Our former principal siding with our former dads was bad enough, but what Serenity's uncle did was equally as bad. So I find the latter guilty.
Thank you, Simona. I call upon my next witness, Jed Hawk.
You know, from what Simona told me, I'm totally shocked to learn that not only did her former principal have a twin brother, but that twin brother of his did the same thing Mr. Jones did back at Springfield. Yeesh! And not only is Jakob Jones as bad as Simona's former principal, but he's worse than her dad and Mr. Buford combined. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Jed. I call upon my next two witnesses, Samantha and Savannah Webster-Pitts.
It's bad enough Tripp, Alexine, Keating, Annex, and Nexxar, and Lena and Aurora got assaulted by Serenity's dad. But now Serenity's uncle assaulted the first three people I listed? This is even worse. And so is Serenity's uncle assaulting Keating's cousin, the Conroy sisters, and some of the bloody knights. He's even worse than my twin sister's former principal, who just so happened to be his twin brother. So I speak for myself and Samantha when we find Serenity's uncle guilty.
Thank you, girls. I call upon my next witness, Cherry Bailey.
I can't believe Serenity's uncle is the twin brother of her dad. And not only that, but this so-called Principal Jakob assaulted more people at Deacon City than Principal Alan did back at Springfield. Including three of my friends. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Cherry. I call upon my next witness, Osiris Evans.
I can't believe Serenity had an uncle who turned out to be her dad's twin brother. And not only that, but her uncle assaulted not just the same three of my friends that her dad did back at Springfield, but some of the bloody knights and Keating's cousin Michael. He's also as misogynistic as Serenity's dad because he assaulted not just Alexine, but Victor Jenkins' sister Alison, their cousin Samantha, and the Conroy sisters. Based on everything that happened up to the beatdown Valentina and I gave that brute, I sure hope it taught him a lesson. But one way or another, I say he's guilty.
You're pathetic. You just got lucky, brat. If it wasn't for your pale puny little girlfriend, you would have been dead.
Oh, I'm sorry, but say that again.
Boys, that's enough. Order in the court. Order in the court. Jakob, based on this display, I can definitely see why Osiris and Valentina defeated you. You clearly don't seem to have remorse for your actions. And speaking of which, may I call Valentina Darmandis up to the stand, please?
Puny, huh? Just remember who shocked you long enough for my boyfriend to give you the final punch in the face, you big brute. You mess with my friends, we mess with you. And for that assault you committed against us and the Bloody Knights, I find you guilty. Especially for defending Serenity's dad, who we just found out to be your twin brother.
Thank you, Valentina. I call upon my next witness, Samuel Andrea Smith.
When I was at my cruise base with my girlfriend Violet, my second-in-command Victor, and my step-cousin Caden, we saw my stepbrother Michael, Victor's sister Alexine and their cousin Samantha, and Daniel Parker getting sent flying all the way over there. And based on what we witnessed, the scum who did that was the former principal of Deacon City Middle School himself, who just so happens to be the twin brother of Caden's former principal. Afterwards, he assaulted Victor and Caden too. Even Vince Jones, no relation whatsoever, and Sid and Donald Wilson, Amy and Julie Conroy got hurt by Principal Jakob's assault too. Therefore, I find that Sicko guilty.
Thank you, Samuel. I call upon the next main victim of the crime, Victor Jenkins.
First, Principal Jacob assaulted Caden's cousin Michael, my sister Allison, our cousin Samantha, and Daniel Parker at the park and then again in the Bloody Knight's base. Then when I punched that monster in the face for that, he tossed me across the room. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Victor. I call upon the next main victim of the crime, Vince Jones.
Adding on to what Victor just said, when Tripp slapped Principal Jacob away for kicking Caden in the face, Tripp and I surrounded that monster when the former charged towards him. Then Principal Jacob pushed Tripp away and dodged the first 2 punches I delivered before I knocked him down with the third. And finally, when I was sure I got the upper hand, he got back up, picked me up off the ground, and sent me flying away sky high. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Vince. I call upon my next witness, Axel.
Jacob, what you did to Victor and Allison Jenkins, their cousin Samantha, my best friend Vince, and the Wilson brothers was totally uncalled for. And you even assaulted Caden, his cousin Michael, and the Conroy sisters. And for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Axel. I call upon the next 2 victims of the crime, Sid and Donald Wilson.
To specify what Principal Jacob did to me and my brother, when we came right at him with clubs along with Amy and Julie Conroy, the brutes dodged all 4 of us.
And because of that, Sid and I accidentally bumped our heads into Amy and Julie. So we had to go to the hospital to check for brain injuries. Therefore, I speak for the both of us when I say we find that monster guilty as charged.
Yeah, what he said.
Thank you, boys. I call upon my next witness, Sean Keller.
Principal Jacob, what you did to my friends was totally uncalled for. You got them sent to the hospital with that stunt you pulled. And for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Sean. I call upon my next witness, Jackson Anders.
Well, Principal Jacob, I hope my speed taught you a lesson for that fight you started with my friends and Caden's cousin. Nobody messes with the Bloody Knights. So for everything you did at Deacon City, including that fight that escalated at our base, I find you guilty.
Thank you, Jack. I call upon my next witness, Julia Gonzalez.
Aside from messing with some of my fellow members of the Bloody Knights, Principal Jacob abused my older brother Chris.
What? Your brother Chris got abused by Jakob too?
Yeah. Jacob was Chris's former principal at Deacon City Middle School. And he's been treating him very badly.
Objection, Your Honor. Julio's older brother was one of the worst students I ever had. Chris has been harassing women and girls.
Principal Jacob, what Chris did back then was awful, but what you did was no better. You treated him just as badly as our former parents did. You didn't even care about the fact that they abused him back home. So I say you're guilty. Because in a sense, you were in cahoots with my parents.
Okay, Jakob, well, I may sustain Julia's objection. Just to make sure, whether to sustain or overrule yours, I need to hear his brother's side of the story. So, I call upon the next main victim of the crime, Chris Gonzalez. So, Chris, your brother Julio mentioned something about the defendant abusing you, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. He did.
Is it also true that you harassed girls and women in the past?
Now I'll be honest, it's true that I did look stuff, but I stopped doing that upon starting a relationship with my girlfriend Coco Rodriguez, who used to do the same thing to boys. But none of the stuff I did in the past was anywhere near as bad as what my former principal, the defendant, did to me.
And what exactly did the defendant did to you that's considered child abuse?
Principal Jakob expelled me all because I pulled several pranks with Samuel D'Andrea, including the time we wrote insults to our substitute teacher during my sophomore year. Then he assaulted me and knocked me down the streets, which nearly caused me to get run over by 3 cars. And what he did to me afterwards was much worse.
What else did he do to you?
He kidnapped me, took me to the woods, assaulted me with chains like my dad did, put me in a chokehold for 20 minutes, and tossed me off a cliff. Because of the last part, I broke my leg and arm and nearly died. It was so horrifying and traumatizing.
I object to everything Chris just said. He admitted to everything he did in the past, including the time he insulted his substitute teacher. He's also a member of the Flying Eagles.
I have heard enough! Jakob, your objection to Chris's statement as well as the objection to Julio's statement are both overruled. Despite Chris's past as a troublemaker, what you did to him was worse. You basically tortured him and left him traumatized. Now Chris, how do you find the defendant?
Well, Your Honor, for all the stuff he did to me back at Deacon City, all I can say is he's guilty.
Very well. Thank you, Chris. And I'm really sorry to hear about all the cruel things he did to you. But not to worry, when I reach a final verdict, he'll get what he deserves. I call upon the next main victim of the crime, Michael Daniel Smith.
When I was at the park with my girlfriend Alison, her cousin Samantha, and one of my friends Daniel Parker, Principal Jakob came out of nowhere and confronted us about his brother. He wanted revenge all because my cousin Caden and his friends testified against their former principal, Jakob's twin brother Alan, and Serenity's mom got him arrested. So when the 4 of us started to head for the bloody night space, Principal Jakob caught up and hit us so hard, we got sent flying all the way to my stepbrother's hideout. And when I was the first person to fight back, that monster kicked me in the face. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Michael Smith. I call upon my next witness, Jakob Jones.
Principal Jakob, what you did to my elder brother Vince and the leader of my crew, the Mighty Morphs, was soon called for. You assaulted them and got them sent to the hospital. And for that, I say you're guilty.
Wait, Jerome, you and Michael formed a group called the Mighty Morphs.
Yes, and while Michael's our leader, I'm the second in command.
Okay, I'll pretend I didn't hear that last part. But back to the matter at hand, I call upon my next witness, Brian Lee.
When my brother Axel told me what happened to some of his friends and the leader of the Mighty Morphs, I was shocked not only because of that, but the fact that Principal Jakob was the twin brother of the former principal of Springfield High School himself, Alan Jones. So for everything the former principal of Deacon City Middle School did, I find him guilty as charged.
Thank you, Brian. I call upon my next witness, Peter Keller.
I'm as shocked as the other members of the Mighty Morphs are based on what my elder brother Sean told me about Principal Jakob. That scumbag's just as bad as his twin brother. Even though I'm glad Sean wasn't assaulted by Principal Jakob, I find that muscle-headed brute guilty for everything he did at Deacon City.
Thank you, Peter. I call upon my next witness, Caleb Hernandez.
I don't know if my older brother Jack taught Principal Jakob a lesson for everything he did to his fellow members of the Bloody Knights and my boss, but I sure hope it did. That brute was so dumb, he could never see that speedy sneak attack coming. So for every time he assaulted someone between 16 and 18 years old, I find him guilty as well.
Thank you, Caleb. I call upon my next witness, Jimmy and Anders.
I agree with my cousin Caleb. I say Principal Jakob's guilty as charged. Nobody messes with the Hernandez family, the Bloody Knights, nor even the Mighty Morphs.
Thank you, Jimmy. I call upon my next witness, Jonah Francis Grayson.
Principal Jakob, are you out of your mind? Assaulting some of the Bloody Knights and the leader of our gang? All because your twin brother's in prison for 75 years? Come on. That's a lame excuse. You just committed the same crimes Principal Allen did. And for that, I find you guilty.
Thank you, Jonah Grayson. I call upon my next witness, Luke Frederickson.
Yeah, dude. What you did to the leader of our gang and some of the bloody knights was unnecessary and really not cool. For that, I find you, Principal Jacob, guilty as charged.
Thank you, Luke Frederickson. I call upon the next main victim of the crime, Allison Jenkins.
Aside from ambushing me, my cousin Samantha, my boyfriend Michael, and Daniel at the park, kicking Michael in the face, and sending my brother Victor flying back at his hideout, Principal Jacob dodged me when I tried to stop him from assaulting us even further. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Allison. I call upon the next main victim of the crime, Samantha Jenkins.
Adding on to what my cousin Allison just said, my boyfriend Daniel tried to retaliate for what Principal Jacob did to all four of us, including her boyfriend Michael, at the park. But then, Principal Jacob picked Daniel up off the ground and sent him flying towards me. Because of that, we both got knocked out before my cousin Victor tried to help us. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Samantha Jenkins. I call upon the next main victim of the crime, Daniel Barker.
Principal Jacob, what you did to us back at the park at Deacon City and at the Bloody Knights base was totally uncalled for. And you did all this because your twin brother's in prison for assaulting the majority of the Tripp Gang back at Springfield. That's pathetic. Principal Allen deserved to get arrested for all the stuff he did and you know it.
Says the brat who slapped me in the face back at the park.
I was only trying to knock some sense into you because you were defending your twin brother and wanted revenge on everyone close to the Tripp Gang, excluding their parents. And for that, I find you guilty.
I'll sustain your objection, Daniel, but only because the defendant deserved what you did to him at the park for confronting you for no reason. Anyway, I call upon my next witness, Adriana Jefferson.
Aside from Chris, some of the Bloody Knights, Victor's sister Allison and their cousin Samantha, and Daniel Parker, Principal Jacob also assaulted my boyfriend Michael Clarke.
Wait, Jacob assaulted your boyfriend too?
Yes. And for that, I say he's guilty.
I need to make sure Adriana's testimony holds water. So, may I call Michael Clarke up to the stand, please?
Yes, Your Honor.
Your girlfriend Adriana told me that the defendant, Principal Jakob Jones, assaulted you back at Deacon City. Was her claim true or false?
Actually, what Adriana said about Principal Jacob was true. He really did assault me, and he never understood what I've gone through before I got disowned by my parents. When I was around 10 years old, I got bullied by Sage Martell, Michael DeHale, and Dustin Halifax. The worst thing they've ever done to me was drowning me by giving me a swirly. Just like they did Caden Concord, who by the way, used to be part of the Scarlet Strikers before he quit that gang. And all the trouble I caused was not by choice. I was manipulated into doing that stuff by the deadly snakes, mainly Luke Smith and Alante Richardson.
How did these deadly snakes force you to cause trouble back at Deacon City?
Luke Smith and Alante forced me to do all the stuff I was never proud of by assaulting me with predatory misconduct. At that time, I was 14 years old and they were each 19. It was the scariest and most traumatizing moment of my life, and even when I got disowned by my family, I never even got the chance to tell them everything I just said. And the worst thing is, the deadly snakes also put me in chokeholds and headlocks whenever I didn't do any of the stuff they told me to do as planned, and they did it for so long, especially for the enjoyment of hearing me scream in agony while going through so much pain. Because of all the horrendous torture I've been subjected to back then, I've been having suicidal thoughts.
Wait, what? Michael, you've been feeling suicidal? Because of all the stuff the deadly snakes did to you? That's why you did those horrible things?
Yes, and Principal Jacob, you had no sympathy for all the pain I've gone through my entire life, and since you assaulted me back at Deacon City, I find you guilty as well.
Oh dear. Michael Clarke, I can't believe you got tortured by a gang that dangerous when you were a teenager. That must have been quite devastating. Jacob, what do you have to say for yourself?
Your Honor, with all due respect, I had no idea Michael Clarke has been molested by a gang of troublemakers who I now know were much more dangerous than I thought he would be.
Even if it's true, it does not matter, because you still assaulted him yourself. Anyway, I call upon my next witness, Richard Thompson.
Before Principal Jacob enacted his revenge on everyone close to the Tripp Gang for getting his twin brother arrested and sent to prison, he's been tracking down the Bloody Knights. And he did so by breaking into my family's house to locate the Bloody Knights base. Hence, why we pressed charges for breaking and entering. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Richard. I call upon my next two witnesses, Tulip and Violet DeRosa.
You know, Violet and I saw my boyfriend Jack and some of the other Bloody Knights going toe-to-toe with Principal Jacob, but we had no idea Jacob was Principal Alan's twin brother.
Yeah. And not only that, he planned that assault against not just them, but some of the people close to the Tripp Gang, all because his twin brother got arrested for all his crimes. He's just as bad as our former brother Bud because they both messed with the Tripp Gang once before.
Wait a minute. Tulip and Violet, you had a brother named Bud. Why isn't he your brother anymore?
Because our parents disowned him. He and his crew have been committing horrific crimes and picked fights with not just the Tripp Gang, but the Flying Eagles too. And those fights between those three gangs were part of the reasons why Chris Gonzalez's life became a living nightmare. And so did all the abuse Principal Jacob put him through.
Yeah. So I speak for myself and Tulip when I say we both find the former principal of Deacon City guilty as charged.
Okay girls. Thank you for your testimony, I guess. I call upon my next two witnesses, Dulce and Gabriela Garcia.
Principal Jacob, what you did to my boyfriend Vince was totally uncalled for. You sent him flying and left him severely injured. I hope you learned your lesson from that kick in the face I gave you.
Yeah. And not only that, but you assaulted some of the Bloody Knights and someone close to a member of the Tripp Gang, all because your twin brother was arrested for all his crimes? That's a dumb excuse for you to get revenge on everyone we cared about who testified against him. You're just as bad as he is. For that, I speak for myself and my twin sister Dulce when I say we find you guilty as charged.
Thank you, girls. I call upon my next witness, Raffles Sandoval.
You know, I'm as upset with Principal Jacob as my girlfriend Gabriela and her twin sister Dulce are for what he did to the others, but I'm also surprised he's Alan's twin brother. If Jacob knew that Alan got arrested for all the stuff he did to the Tripp Gang back at Springfield, he shouldn't have defended him in the first place, but since he did, I find him guilty for that and all the crimes he committed at Deacon City.
Thank you, Raffle. I call upon the next two victims of the crime, Amy and Julie Conroy.
Principal Jakob's almost as psychotic and misogynistic as our former dad. He assaulted not just me and my sister Julie, but Alexine like his twin brother Alan did back at Springfield, Allison Jenkins, and the latter's cousin Samantha too.
Yeah. And like our step-cousin's former principal did him, that big brute assaulted Keating along with our other step-cousin Michael Smith at the Bloody Knights base at Deacon City. Therefore, I speak for myself and my sister Amy when I say we find Serenity's uncle guilty for everything he did to us and our friends back at Deacon City.
Thank you, girls. I call upon my next witness, Sage Martel.
Well, I may have given Michael Clarke a swirly like Michael Dale Dustin and I did to Keating back at high school, but looking back on his past trauma, I actually feel bad for him. But when Serenity told us that her uncle was the twin brother of our former principal, her own dad, we were all shocked about it. Her uncle's just as bad as her dad could ever be, not to mention, Serenity's uncle assaulted Tripp, Alexine, and Keating like her dad manipulated me and my friends into doing to them back at Springfield, and he even had no disregard for all the torture the deadly snakes put Michael Clarke through. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Sage. But before I let you go, I would recommend apologizing to Michael Clarke for all the times you bullied him in the past. You understand?
Yes, Your Honor. I'll apologize to him after this hearing.
Good. Anyway, I call upon my next witness, Vincent Martel.
I can't believe Serenity had an uncle who was also her dad's twin brother. And not only that, but her uncle abused Tripp, Alexine, and Keating just like her dad did 2 years ago. This is so messed up. And to make things worse, Serenity's uncle also abused 2 students of his own back at Deacon City without regards to their tragic backstories. Between all that and the fact he also assaulted some of the Bloody Knights, Caden's cousin Michael Smith, Victor's sister Alison and their cousin Samantha, and the Conroy sisters, I find him guilty as charged.
Thank you, Vincent. I call upon my next witness, Abigail Cassidy.
I may have broken up with Sage before finding out that he along with Michael Dale and Dustin also gave Michael Clarke a swirly. But I'm even more shocked to learn that Serenity had an uncle who's just as abusive as her dad was back at Springfield, and what's even more shocking was that her uncle was his twin brother. The only difference is that her uncle, Jacob, saw fit to kidnap Chris Gonzalez and torture him. Assaulting the former member of these Flying Eagles I heard about with chains like his dad did, putting him in a chokehold, and tossing him into the streets and then off a cliff. Dude, not even Serenity's dad could do something like that to Tripp. But regardless, I find her uncle guilty.
Thank you, Abigail. I call upon my next witness, Ruby Westbrook.
Unbelievable! Serenity's got an uncle who turned out to be her dad's twin brother and a principal who's just as abusive as the latter could ever be. This is insane. And aside from assaulting Tripp, Alexine, and Caden, Serenity's uncle resorted to even more extreme measures than her dad ever did, like assaulting some of the Bloody Knights, hunting said gang down by breaking and entering into the home of one member of the Fearless 15 to track down their location, kidnapping and torturing Chris Gonzalez, and assaulting another one of his own students named Michael Clarke while disregarding the torture said student went through at the hands of the deadly snakes. With all that in mind, I find that monster guilty.
Thank you, Ruby. I call upon my next 2 witnesses, Rex and Felix McMillen.
Gotta agree with Abigail and Ruby on this one. 1 corrupt principal was bad enough, but 2, that's even worse.
Yeah. And to add further insult, Principal Jacob, who just so happens to be Serenity's uncle and Principal Alan's twin brother, assaulted more people than her dad ever did. He even went as far as kidnapping a student of his own and torturing him by assaulting him with chains, putting him in a chokehold, and tossing him off a cliff. With all that in mind, I speak for myself and my brother Rex when I say we find Serenity's uncle guilty.
Thank you, boys. I call upon my next witness, Michael Dale.
You know, I'm starting to feel bad for Michael Clarke knowing what he's gone through aside from the swirly Sage Dustin and I gave him back in the day. Not only did Serenity's uncle assault him, but he disregarded the fact Michael Clarke got molested and tortured by the deadly snakes. Principal Jacob even kidnapped and assaulted Chris Gonzalez and enacted his revenge against Tripp, Alexine and Caden by assaulting them like Principal Alan did back at Springfield. He even assaulted Caden's cousin Michael Smith, their step-cousins Amy and Julie Conroy, some of the Bloody Knights, including Caden's step-cousin Samuel himself along with Chris the day the latter got expelled back at Deacon City, and Victor Jenkins' sister Alison and their cousin Samantha. Compared to the number of students Serenity's dad assaulted, her uncle did much worse, and for that, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Michael Dale. I call upon my next witness, Stephanie Gavin.
Serenity's uncle's reminding me of my psycho Karen of a mom than my former principal ever could, considering the number of people he assaulted. If anything, Principal Jakob's as much of a concussion beast as my mom ever could be because he severely injured 3 members of the Tripp Gang and some of the Bloody Knights. And like my mom did to Jessica McIntyre and Mrs. McKenna, Serenity's uncle kidnapped Chris Gonzalez and took him somewhere private. Only difference is, that brute also tortured Chris by assaulting him with chains, putting him in a chokehold like Jackson did Tripp back at Springfield, and tossing him off a cliff. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Objection, Your Honor. I did not give the Tripp Gang or the Bloody Knights a concussion. I don't even know the witness's mom.
Overruled. Regardless of how you assaulted the Tripp Gang and the Bloody Knights, it reminded Stephanie of the times her mom gave her sister Natalie, and her brother Eric a concussion. And you don't even have to know Tiana to be just as abusive as she was. Anyway, I call upon my next witness, Artmore.
Principal Jacob's almost as crazy as Simona's daddies. I mean, going after the majority of people close to the Tripp Gang all because Principal Alan rightfully ended up in prison. Good grief. What a pathetic excuse. And what's worse, that scumbag kidnapped and assaulted one of his own students from Beacon City Middle School and Beacon City High School. He did something that deplorable in the woods, the flipping woods. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Art. I call upon my next witness, Dustin Halifax.
As far as my past actions against Michael Clarke are concerned, I'm also beginning to regret my hand at bullying him, knowing what Serenity's uncle and the Deadly Snakes did to him. Though I'm surprised Serenity's uncle's the twin brother of her dad, I'm even more shocked and disgusted knowing that he abused not just Tripp, Alexine, and Keating, but Keating's cousin Michael Smith, the leader of the Bloody Knights himself, Samuel Ardern, some of his fellow members, Victor Jenkins' sister Alexine, their cousin Samantha Jenkins' boyfriend Daniel Parker, Amy and Julie Connery, and worst of all, Chris Gonzalez, who used to be a member of the Flying Eagles. I mean, come on. This guy's got to be worse than his own twin brother or something because of all that. So to make it simple, I find Serenity's uncle guilty for his path of revenge, especially against the Tripp Gang and everyone close to them, with the exception of the majority of their parents who also abused some members in particular.
Thank you, Dustin. I call upon my next witness, Penelope Whitelock.
You know, when I broke up with Dustin, I never knew that he along with Sage and Michael Dale had a hand at giving Michael Clarke a swirly like they did Keating in the past. But like them, not only am I shocked to learn that Serenity had an uncle, but her uncle turned out to be his twin brother and an abusive principal like Principal Alan was. Like Serenity's dad, her uncle assaulted Tripp, Alexine, and Keating. But he also assaulted not just Michael Clarke, but some of the Bloody Knights along with a few of that gang's relatives, Amy and Julie Conroy, Keating's cousin Michael Smith. And worst of all, he kidnapped Chris Gonzalez, assaulted him even with chains, nearly got him run over by 3 cars by tossing him into the street, put him in a chokehold. And when he took him to the woods upon kidnapping him, he threw the former member of the Flying Eagles himself off a cliff, causing him to scratch one of his arms and legs. Not even Serenity's dad could ever abuse a former high school student like that. So considering how worse her uncle was compared to him, I find him guilty as well.
Thank you, Penelope. I call upon my next witness, Asante Ackah.
Considering the fact that Mr. Buffett conspired with Mr. Easton and set Deacon and Simona up for a hate crime they never committed, meaning they never did anything to Sakura, Serenity's uncle was just as bad as the 2 former fathers themselves due to the number of former high school students he himself assaulted, mainly at Beacon City. So while I find Mr. Buffett guilty for falsifying the police report about Deacon and Simona acting racist and homophobic towards Sakura, I find Serenity's uncle guilty as well.
Thank you, Asante. I call upon my next witness, Luca Rivera.
And just when you think Serenity's papa was bad, her tia is presumably much worse than him. Like Principal Alan, Principal Jakob assaulted Tripp, Alexine, and Keating. But that dingo also assaulted Keating's cousin Michael Smith, his step-cousin Samuel Ardern, some of Sam's fellow members of the Bloody Knights, Amy and Julie Connery, Victor Jenkins' her manor Alexine, their cousin Samantha, someone named Daniel Parker, the leader of the Scarlet Strikers aka Michael Clarke, and a former member of the Flying Eagles. And that former member of said gang was Chris Gonzalez, who was also abused by his parents. Based on the amount of people Serenity's uncle assaulted, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Luca Rivera. I call upon my next witness, Victoria Carter.
I'm as shocked as Luke is about everything I've just heard. It's one thing for Sage, Michael Dale, and Dustin Halifax to drown Michael Clarke, the leader of the Scarlet Strikers, by giving him a swirly like they did Keating. It's another thing for Serenity to have an uncle who just so happens to be the twin brother of our former principal, Serenity's dad. But for Serenity's uncle to assault Tripp, Alexine, Keating, Michael Smith, Samuel Ardern, Victor Alexine and Samantha Jenkins, Vince Jones, Daniel Parker, Sid and Donald Wilson, Amy and Julie Connery, Michael Clarke, and Chris Gonzalez. Crikey! Not even Serenity's dad could assault so much people. Her uncle's even worse than him. For that, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Victoria. I call upon my next witness, Lucy McCall.
Seriously?
Serenity's got an uncle who's just a principal as corrupt and abusive as her dad was back at Springfield. Come on. Hasn't the Tripp Gang suffered enough? Principal Jakob, you and Serenity's dad remind me and Stephanie of Principal Clementine. Because like her, you both allowed child abuse on school grounds at high school. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Lucy. I call upon my next witness, Maximus Burton.
Well, I cannot believe this. Not only is Serenity's uncle her dad's twin brother, he assaulted more former high school students than our former principal did at Springfield. And he even targeted the Tripp Gang and some of the people close to them other than their parents. I mean, come on! What was that guy thinking? You know what? Forget I even asked. For all the stuff he did at Deacon City, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Maximus. I call upon my next witness, Jonah Burton.
I agree with Maximus. This is madness. So for everything that happened at Deacon City, I find Serenity's uncle guilty.
Thank you, Jonah Burton. I call upon my next witness, Gunnar Burton.
I'm on the same page as my brothers. I can't believe my girlfriend has an uncle who turned out to be her dad's twin brother. One who's just arguably more abusive than the latter. And considering the amount of former high school students Serenity's uncle assaulted compared to how many her dad did, he's done much worse. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Gunnar. I call upon my next witness, Opal Hightower.
So, yeah. The Tripp Gang getting assaulted by Serenity's dad was bad enough. But what her uncle did to 3 members of that gang in particular and a few other people at Deacon City was even worse. Especially what he did to Chris Gonzalez in the woods. Even though Serenity's uncle didn't molest him. Assaulting him with chains, nearly getting him run over by 3 cars, putting him in a chokehold, and tossing him off a cliff was almost as cruel, psychotic, and brutal as that. So with all that in mind, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Opal. I call upon my next witness, Dominic Omega.
You know, based on the description Serenity gave me and our friends about her uncle, I can definitely see the resemblance. Except for the beard, he looks just like her dad. But aside from that, I can't believe her uncle would go as far as assaulting more former high school students at Deacon City than her dad did back at Springfield. If anything, Serenity's uncle is even more abusive and worse than her dad. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Dominic. I call upon my next witness, Taylor Brown.
You want to know what I find shocking about this whole thing? I mean, aside from the fact Serenity's uncle's the twin brother of her dad, the former's more abusive than the latter. And given the amount of former and current high school students he assaulted back at Deacon City compared to the amount of students assaulted by her dad back at Springfield, I think it's fair to say that I find Serenity's uncle guilty as charged.
Thank you, Taylor. I call upon my next 2 witnesses, Nala and Gwenolinsky.
From what Annex and Nexxar told me and Gwen, Serenity's uncle assaulted Tripp, Alexine, and Keating at Deacon City like her dad did, all 5 of them combined back at Springfield. And to add further insult, he assaulted some of the Bloody Knights, including their leader, Samuel D'Andrea, as well as Keating's cousin Michael Smith, Amy, and Julie Conroy, the leader of the Scarlet Strikers himself, Michael Clarke, and Chris Gonzalez. Yeah. So with that in mind, I speak for myself and my sister Nala when I say we find Serenity's uncle guilty as charged for everything he did at Deacon City.
Thank you, girls. I call upon my next 2 witnesses, Dax and Everett.
From what Zeke and I heard from Nala, Gwen, Annex, and Nexxar, Serenity's uncle, who just so happened to be her dad's twin brother, assaulted Tripp, Alexine, and Keating like our former principal did back at Springfield. And he even assaulted some of these Bloody Knights they mentioned, including Keating's step-cousin Samuel D'Andrea Smith. And based on what they told us, Serenity's uncle's an even bigger misogynist than her dad could ever be, because he also hurt Victor Jenkins' sister Allyson, their cousin Samantha, and Amy and Julie Conroy. He even stooped to an even bigger level than Serenity's dad ever did when he kidnapped someone named Chris Gonzalez, took him to the woods, and severely injured and tortured him. And before that, he assaulted him and Samuel out of anger and tossed them into the streets, nearly getting them hit by 3 cars, all because they insulted their substitute teacher. And at the end of the torture Serenity's uncle put Chris through in the woods, he tossed him off a cliff, which caused him to scratch his arm and leg. Therefore, I speak for myself and my brother Dax when I say we find Serenity's uncle guilty for everything he did up to the assault at the Bloody Knights headquarters.
Thank you, boys. I call upon my next two witnesses, Crowtoon Productions Incorporated and Crow Girl 22.
So, you're the scum who committed all those acts of aggravated assault and child abuse back at Deacon City. You know, that was really stupid of you to defend your twin brother in spite of what he did. He was rightfully brought to justice for all the pain he put the Tripp Gang through.
And what makes you think Alan deserved to be sentenced to spend 75 years in prison here, Birdbrain?
He assaulted Tripp, Alexine, Keating, Annex, Nexxar, Lena, and Aurora on school grounds, all because of the trouble they caused inside and outside of school back at Springfield. He basically allowed child abuse against the Tripp Gang on school grounds. That caused his school to get shut down at the cost of the jobs of his former staff.
Yeah! And that's all the more reason why he deserved to get arrested in the first place. And that's why your sister-in-law divorced him. And you're no better than he is because you also allowed child abuse on school grounds at Deacon City. As a middle school principal and a high school principal. And believe me, when Master DC King 2009 told us all about you, we couldn't believe it ourselves. You're even worse than your twin brother. So for everything you did at your hometown, I speak for the both of us when I say we find you guilty.
Thank you, Crowtoon Productions Incorporated and Crow Girl 22. I call upon my next witness, Master DC King 2009.
Well, Jakob Jones, we finally meet. Face to face. Anyway, Your Honor, this piece of junk tried to get revenge on the Tripp Gang for getting his twin brother arrested. He ambushed Keating's cousin Michael Daniel Smith, Victor Jenkins' sister Allyson, their cousin Samantha Jenkins, and Samantha's boyfriend Daniel Parker at the park. Then he hit them so hard, they got sent flying all the way to the Bloody Night space, which was where they were going to get help from said gang. And when Jakob followed them inside, he kicked Michael in the face, dodged Allyson, causing her to trip and fall on the floor, picked Daniel up off the floor and tossed him towards Samantha, tossed Victor away upon getting knocked down by the ladder, dodged Keating when he tried to hit him with a bat, kicked him in the face like he did his cousin, pushed Tripp away upon getting slapped away by him, knocking Alexine down in the process. Dodged Vince Jones when he tried to punch him twice and sent him flying upon getting knocked down by the third one before getting kicked by the latter's girlfriend Dulce. Dodged Sid and Donald Wilson and Amy and Julie Conroy when they tried to ambush him from 4 different angles before getting ambushed by Jack Hernandez. And finally, he tried to defeat Osiris before getting electrified by Valentina and knocked down by her boyfriend himself. In addition to that, he assaulted Michael Clarke, the leader of the Scarlet Strikers, without regard for all the torture he suffered at the hands of the Deadly Snakes. And finally, he abused Chris Gonzalez, a former member of the Flying Eagles, in the following ways. First, he expelled him for insulting a substitute teacher and pulling pranks. Then, he assaulted him and threw him into the streets, which nearly caused him to get run over by 3 cars. And worst of all, he kidnapped him, took him to the woods, and tortured him in one of the worst possible ways. First, as previously done by Chris's former father, Jerry Gonzalez, Jacob assaulted Chris with chains. Next, he put him in a chokehold for 20 minutes. And finally, he tossed him off a cliff, nearly breaking his arm and leg and causing him to black out. He was also getting himself addicted to drugs. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Master DC King 2009. I call upon my next witness, Sam Wiggle.
Aside from everything that was said by Master DC King 2009, Crowtoon Productions Incorporated, and Crow Girl 22, Jakob also acted racist towards BonQuisha, her parents, and her stepmother. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
I don't know if this is true or not, but may I call BonQuisha Parks up to the stand, please?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is it true that the defendant acted racist towards you and your family?
As a matter of fact, it is, Your Honor. That musclehead called me, my biological parents, and my stepmom monkeys. He even called my dad a stupid black alien. Because of that, Serenity's aunt had to ground him for 17 days. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Oh dear. Jakob, have you no respect for black people? You tried to dehumanize the Parks family, and I'm sure BonQuisha's husband wouldn't like that either. Speaking of which, may I call Russ Levine up to the stand, please?
Principal Jakob, you think you can act racist towards my wife and her relatives and get away with it? I don't think so. What you did was unreasonable and out of line. And for that, I find you guilty as charged.
Thank you, Russ. I call upon my next witness, Rachel Murphy.
Her. Who?
That would be me. And you must be Serenity's uncle, right?
Her paternal uncle, yes. Her father's my twin brother.
Well, I gotta say, Serenity told me a bit about you. You abused some of her former classmates and some of the people close to them all because her dad got arrested for child abuse. You even abused some of your own students from your job as a principal of not just Deacon City Middle School, but Deacon City High School too. You also committed drug abuse. Your psychosis is arguably much more noticeable than that of Serenity's dad. So based on the other witnesses' stories and the complete lack of remorse on your face, I find you guilty as charged.
Rachel, how were you able to determine the defendant's mental disorder so quickly?
I started studying in the field of criminology at the University of Miami.
Well, that's all I need to hear. I call upon my next witness, Dakota.
You abandoned my brother and sent him to prison.
Got that right, Jacob. Alan deserved to go to prison for everything he did at Springfield. And you're next. Because you defended him and assaulted some of the people close to the Tripp Gang other than the parents who abused some of the members of that gang in particular. And for that, as well as your other crimes at Deacon City, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Dakota. I call upon my next witness, Serenity Jones.
Uncle Ackah, are you out of your mind? You tried to get revenge on Tripp and his friends by targeting some of the people close to them other than the parents who abused them. And you did all this because my man rightfully got my dad arrested for everything he did at Springfield, including the mass assaults he manipulated my friends into committing. Crikey! You're even worse than my dad. You're an even bigger disgrace to our family name than his. And for that, I say you're guilty.
And you're a disgrace to our family name for passing judgment on me, Serenity. I'm your uncle and you're gonna watch the tone of yours before I make you.
Aurora, not so fast, Jakob. You will not lay one single finger on your niece. You've assaulted enough girls at Deacon City. And she's right. You've set an even worse example than her dad did. And there's a few more people who would like a word with you. Starting with your wife, Selena Jones.
Selena, you better not testify against me. I'm your husband. Don't you dare.
Not anymore, Jakob. You brought it all on yourself the moment you started abusing your own former students back at Deacon City. You even made things worse by defending your brother. Your addiction to drugs and your obsession with revenge made you into a monster. And that's not the man I want to stay married to anymore. So I have no choice but to find you guilty. Your Honor, I want to file Jakob for a divorce. Permanently.
As you wish, Selena. You can sign the divorce papers after the trial. But for now, I call upon my next witness, Jonah Jones.
Dad, what you've done at Deacon City was totally uncalled for. You've brought shame to our entire family. My older cousin and my aunt are especially very disappointed in you. I'm sorry to have to do this, but I have no choice but to find you guilty as charged.
Thank you, Jonah Jones. I call upon my next witness, Burt Jones.
I agree with Jonah. Dad, you've set just as bad of an example as our uncle did. So I'm afraid I'm gonna have to find you guilty as charged for all your crimes at Deacon City.
Thank you, Burt. And finally, I call upon my last witness, Derek Jones.
I also find my dad guilty. From what I heard, my older brothers and cousin feel the same way. He and my uncle both failed as parents and principals.
Thank you, Derek. Now, before I reach a verdict, Jakob Jones, do you have any closing statements you wish to make?
I already mentioned the stuff Chris Gonzalez and Michael Clarke did, but as for the Tripp Gang, they don't deserve to roam around free. They ruined my brother's life. Tripp has my niece. He and Alexine acted racist and homophobic towards a few students of different races and 6 LGBTQ students. Keating assaulted my niece with a baton, Deacon acted homophobic towards a lesbian student and acted heartless towards Sage. He and Simona tried to kill Sage and Abigail. And Annex, Nexxar, Lena, and Aurora assaulted Dex, Zeke, Nola, and Gwen with spiked bats. And my family and the Sage crew saw fit to betray not just me, but Alan too. We're the real victims here, not them.
On the contrary, the Tripp Gang learned their lessons and made amends with the Sage crew, so your statement holds no sway at this point. So Jakob, upon hearing this and based on the evidence from all witnesses' stories, I find you guilty and sentence you to 80 years in prison. You will also be forced to sign the divorce papers, and Selena will have full custody of all 3 of your sons. Officer Nelson, get that misogynistic drug addict out of my sight.
Hey! You can't do that. That's not fair. I demand a retrial. Man! I hate this city.
That's enough, Jacob. And since your trial here is over and done with, you'll be staying in the cell for the next 80 years. And if you try to escape, the judge will extend your sentence. Now stay put and don't even think about trying to escape. And maybe when you behave yourself, we'll release you early and send you to rehab.
I'll get my entire family and the Tripp Gang back for this. Even you 3, Master DC King 2009, Crowtoon Productions Incorporated, and Crowgirl 22.
Not on my watch, you sick freak.